The fish just on the 30% soybean meal. Classic signs of enteritis, that gut inflammation. You could see more immune cells in the gut lining. The tissue underneath was thicker, more mucus cells, and problems with how the cells absorb nutrients, like less dense microvilli. Just, visible damage.
Okay, so the soybean meal definitely caused the expected problems.
Definitely. But here's the key takeaway. In the groups getting the yeast additives, those problems were much, much lower, or even absent.
A whole new era of communication in the global aquaculture industry is coming. Now you have the brightest minds in aquaculture right in your pocket. And what's best? You can listen to all of them while driving to a farm, traveling, or running errands. It's never been this good, and it's never been this simple. Welcome to the Aquaculture Podcast Show, the first AI-based podcast in aquaculture, where you'll find cutting-edge insights in everything that's working in aquaculture, nutrition, health, and production.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a really critical challenge in aquaculture, specifically for Atlantic salmon, and it's all about feed. How do we handle alternative proteins? There's been this ongoing issue with soybean meal, a common fish meal replacement. It's cost-effective, sure, but it can cause gut problems. We're looking at a recent investigation that gives some pretty practical ways forward here. Okay, let's unpack this a bit. We all know relying solely on fish meal isn't sustainable long-term. So, soybean meal stepped in. Widely used, helps the bottom line. But for carnivorous fish like salmon, it's not perfect. It contains these anti-nutritional factors. These can irritate the gut, particularly the lower intestine. We're talking inflammation, changes to the gut lining cells, immune cells rushing in, and that messes with nutrient uptake, fish health, right when these young fish need to thrive.
Exactly, and the industry is constantly trying to figure out how to make these alternative feeds work better. This particular study, it really zeroes in on using additives derived from Brewers yeast, specifically a purified beta-glucan from the cell wall, and then a yeast extract from the inside of the cell.
Wise Additives turns podcast airtime into brand authority. We don't sell ads, we elevate voices. Curious how far your voice can go to become a reference in the industry and attract more leads? Scan the QR code and discover how we can turn your expertise into unmatched brand authority. Let's transform expertise into influence, starting now.
The big question was, can these additives help the gut recover from that soybean meal stress? Can they maybe tweak the gene expression related to inflammation and cell death, and just generally keep the gut structure and immune system more stable in salmon Parr?
Right, so how did they actually test this? What was the setup?
It was an 8-week feeding trial. They used juvenile Atlantic salmon Parr stage. They set up 5 different diets. You had your control group, no soybean meal at all. Then a group getting 30% soybean meal, which is quite high, with no additives. That's the challenge group. And then 3 more groups, all getting that 30% soybean meal, but with the additives. One got a tiny amount, 0.02% of the purified beta-glucan. Another got 1% of the yeast extract, and the last one got a higher dose, 2.5% yeast extract. These yeast bits, they're processed differently, right? The beta-glucan is about structure and immune priming, while the extract is packed with nucleotides, peptides, antioxidants, things from the cytoplasm.
Got it. So different potential modes of action there. What did they see when they looked at the fish's gut tissue?
The histology. This is where it gets really clear. The fish just on the 30% soybean meal. Classic signs of enteritis, that gut inflammation. You could see more immune cells in the gut lining. The tissue underneath was thicker, more mucus cells, and problems with how the cells absorb nutrients, like less dense microvilli. Just, visible damage.
Okay, so the soybean meal definitely caused the expected problems.
Definitely. But here's the key takeaway. In the groups getting the yeast additives, those problems were much, much lower, or even absent. Both the beta-glucan group and the 1% yeast extract group showed significantly less immune cell infiltration and less of that mucus cell overproduction, less swelling in the lamina propria.
So the structure looked better.
Yeah, the gut structure looked almost as good as the control group that didn't get any soybean meal. It really points to these additives protecting the gut lining effectively.
That's impressive. But you mentioned the higher dose, the 2.5% yeast extract.
Right. That's the interesting wrinkle. That group actually didn't show as much benefit as the 1% group. The protection wasn't quite as strong. It sort of raises questions about optimal dosing, doesn't it?
It really does. Maybe more isn't always better. Did they look deeper maybe at the genetic level to see what was happening?
They did. They looked at the molecular side, specifically gene expression. They tracked 3 genes known to be involved in this kind of gut issue. one related to apoptosis or programmed cell death, one for cell proliferation, like cell growth, and one marker for cellular stress.
And what did that show?
In the fish fed just the soybean meal, the genes for cell death and cell growth were significantly upregulated, kicked into high gear, which makes sense, right? Damage leads to cell death, and the gut tries to compensate by growing new cells faster. High turnover.
Right, a sign of distress and repair.
Exactly. And this is crucial in the fish getting the beta-glucan or the 1% yeast extract. That upregulation was markedly suppressed. Those genes quieted down.
Ah, so it lines up perfectly with the histology, the visual evidence.
Perfectly. It suggests less cell damage, less inflammation at the molecular level. Interestingly, the stress marker gene didn't show a statistically significant difference across groups, though there was a trend for it to be higher in the soybean-only group.
So the main effect seems to be more around immunomodulation and tissue repair, maybe not directly hitting that specific stress pathway as hard.
That seems to be the implication, yes. Modulating the immune response, protecting the tissue.
Okay, so the gut definitely benefited. What about the fish overall? Did this gut inflammation or the lack of it show up in their general health, like blood work?
That's another important piece. They looked at standard hematology, red blood cells, white blood cells, hemoglobin, and across all the groups, those systemic markers were pretty stable. No major red flags systemically.
So the problem really seemed contained within the gut.
Largely, yes. It suggests the inflammation was localized, which is good news, in a way. There was one interesting exception, though. In the beta-glucan group, the percentage of monocytes, a type of white blood cell, actually decreased slightly.
Oh, what might that indicate?
Well, it could suggest a very targeted effect. Beta-glucans are known to interact with specific immune receptors, particularly in the gut mucosa. So perhaps it was fine-tuning the local immune response, maybe reducing the need for circulating monocytes to be recruited without causing a big systemic alarm. It fits with the idea of promoting a balanced gut immunity rather than just, dampening everything or firing up everything.
Fascinating. Okay, localized gut benefits, targeted immune effects, but let's get to the bottom line for producers. What about growth? Did protecting the gut translate into bigger, faster-growing fish?
This is probably the most surprising part of the study, actually. Despite those really clear differences in gut health that we saw under the microscope and in the gene expression, there were no statistically significant differences in final weight, specific growth rate, feed conversion ratio, or protein efficiency ratio.
No difference at all, even with the inflamed guts in the SBM-only group.
Statistically speaking, no significant difference over the 8 weeks. Now, there was a numerical trend. The control group, no SBM, tended to have slightly higher weight gain. The SBM-only group tended to be lowest, and the yeast additive groups were kind of in the middle.
Okay, so maybe a hint of an effect, but not strong enough to be statistically significant in this time frame.
Exactly. It suggests that maybe, in this early juvenile stage, the fish can compensate for a degree of gut inflammation, especially if the diet is otherwise good. Or perhaps 8 weeks just wasn't long enough for those growth differences to become really pronounced.
That makes sense. You'd likely need a longer trial, maybe through the whole grow-out phase, to see the full picture on performance.
Absolutely. Long-term studies are definitely needed, but it also brings us back to that dosing point we touched on earlier.
Right, the 1% yeast extract versus the 2.5%.
Yes. The fact that 1% performed better than 2.5% across most measures histology, gene expression, is really critical for practical use. It strongly suggests there's an optimal dose. Pushing inclusion levels too high, especially with something like yeast extract that's rich in active components, might actually overstimulate things, maybe trigger counterproductive immune responses, or just not provide any added benefit beyond a certain point. It might even reverse the benefits.
So precision is key. It's not just about throwing yeast in, it's about the right kind at the right amount.
Precisely. The 1% yeast extract and that very low 0.02% beta-glucan level emerged as really promising thresholds in this study for supporting gut health.
Okay, let's wrap this up. What's the main message here for people working in aquaculture, dealing with feed formulations every day?
I think the research really confirms that these specific yeast derivatives, the beta-glucan and the yeast extract, can make a tangible difference. They clearly helped mitigate those negative gut effects from high soybean meal inclusion in young salmon.
Yeah, it seems they restored the gut integrity, calmed down those cellular damage markers,
improved the actual structure you could see, and did it all without messing up the fish's overall blood parameters, or at least in the short term, their growth.
So for the industry, this offers a scientifically backed tool. It helps address that big trade-off when using plant proteins. It supports the move towards more sustainable feeds, which we know is crucial, without necessarily sacrificing fish health in the process.
Exactly. It's a valuable tool in the toolbox. Of course, the next steps are important. We need more research, maybe looking deeper with proteomics, metabolomics. Definitely need those longer-term growth trials. And, crucially, commercial-scale validation. Figuring out the real cost benefit in practical farm settings.
Right, translating these promising thresholds into something economically viable for large-scale operations.
That's the next hurdle. How do we take these findings and implement them effectively and affordably across the board? That's the big question now, I think, moving from promising results to industry standard.
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow the Aquaculture Podcast Show on your favorite platform. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook to stay updated on the latest episodes and industry insights. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.